I changed my bank account information and started receiving my pension on a new card. When I got home, my daughter and son-in-law were already waiting, their faces filled with rage. "Have you lost your mind, Dad? We nearly had a heart attack at the ATM." They screamed, but after I calmly placed 53 pages of bank statements on the table showing all of their exploitation, both of them fell silent and went pale. "Hi everyone, thanks for joining. Before we see what happened after I placed those 53 pages on the table, please like, subscribe, and comment where you're watching from. Reminder: this fictional story explores meaningful themes around family boundaries and financial abuse, though dramatized for impact. Let's continue. When I opened the front door to my house that Thursday afternoon, I never imagined my own daughter would be waiting for me, her eyes blazing with fury. But there she was. Michelle stood in the middle of my living room. My living room in the house Helen and I had bought 35 years ago, with her arms crossed and her face twisted with rage. Beside her, Kyle paced like a caged animal, his cell phone clutched so tight, his knuckles had gone white. The veins in his neck bulged. His face was flushed purple. They didn't even let me close the door. "Have you lost your mind?" Michelle's voice cut through the silence like a knife. She took 3 quick steps toward me, heels clicking hard against the floor. "My husband nearly had a heart attack at the ATM this morning." I set my canvas bag down on the small table by the door, the same table where Helen used to leave her keys. The bag held supplies from the hardware store, bulbs for Helen's azaleas, work gloves, a hand trowel. Normal purchases for a Thursday morning. But there was nothing normal about this moment. "Where is the money, George?" Kyle stopped pacing and turned to face me, his voice a desperate roar. He thrust his phone toward my face, showing his banking app. "Heck, where the hell is it? The card was empty. There wasn't a single goddamn dollar." His words bounced off the walls, filled with venom. But something had changed in me. Words that would have destroyed me 6 months ago now bounced off me like rain off a tin roof. "I changed my banking information," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. How steady. I looked Michelle directly in the eyes, those eyes that used to look up at me with such trust when she was small. "My pension now goes to a new card. One that only I control." The silence that followed was deafening. The old grandfather clock in the corner ticked steadily, marking out the seconds. Outside, a car drove past. A dog barked somewhere down the street. Normal sounds, normal life. But inside this house, time seemed to have stopped. Michelle opened her mouth, but no sound came out. She looked like a fish gasping for air, her jaw working, but producing nothing. Her face went from red to white in the space of a heartbeat. Kyle froze mid-step, 1 foot still raised off the ground. His face transformed from bright red to deathly ashen white. The phone nearly slipped from his hand. It was that second before an explosion that everyone knows is coming, but no one has the power to prevent it. "What?" Michelle finally managed to gasp, bringing one hand up to her chest, like she'd been physically struck. Her voice was barely above a whisper now. All that earlier rage compressed into something smaller, sharper. "What did you say? You heard me," I said, and I was amazed at how good it felt to stand my ground, to not apologize, to not immediately try to fix whatever I'd apparently broken in their carefully constructed world. "Dad." She caught herself, stumbled over the word. "You can't do that. You can't do what?" I asked, my voice still steady, still calm. "Can't control my own money? Can't make decisions about my own pension? The pension I earned working 41 years, driving trucks across this country. But Michelle's voice cracked. "When we depend on that money, we have expenses, debts to pay." "Debts!" I repeated the word, slowly tasting it. Something inside me had hardened over the past few weeks, hardened like steel in a forge. Are you referring to Kyle's new Dodge Charger, the one sitting in my driveway? Or maybe the vacation to Miami you two took last month, the one I wasn't invited to? I watched the color drain further from Michelle's face. Or perhaps, I continued, and I could feel 3 years of swallowed words rising up like a flood. You're talking about that 75-inch television you bought, or the $1,500 gold necklace you're wearing right now. The one I found the receipt for last month, all bought with my money, my pension. Kyle took a step forward, his index finger pointing at me like a weapon shaking with rage. You live in our house, he spat out, and actual spittle flew from his lips. You eat our food. You use our electricity, our water, our heat. It's the least you can do to contribute. It's only fair, old man. Our house. He'd said our house. I felt something cold and hard settle in my chest. Our house. I let the words hang in the air for a moment. How interesting that you call it that now, Kyle, when the property deeds still have my late wife's name and mine on them. This house that Helen and I bought in 1990, brick by brick mortgage payment, by mortgage payment sacrifice after sacrifice, is now your house, in my son-in-law's vocabulary. I took a step forward, and to my surprise, both of them actually took a step back. This is my house, I said, and my voice was harder than I'd ever heard it, harder than I knew I was capable of. Want my house that I bought with money I earned with my own 2 hands. The house where Helen and I raised our daughter, where we celebrated Christmases and birthdays, where we built a life together. I looked at Michelle, really looked at her. You two came to live here 3 years ago. I continued, my voice dropping lower but no less firm. 3 years ago, when you lost your apartment because you couldn't pay rent. When Kyle lost his job and you couldn't make ends meet. I opened my door to you. I welcomed you into my home. I thought I was helping my family. My voice cracked slightly on that last word, but I pushed through it. I didn't know I was inviting in vultures to pick my bones clean. I can't believe you're talking to me like this, Michelle said, and now the tears began to flow down her cheeks. But they weren't tears of sadness. I knew these tears. I'd seen them my whole life ever since she was a little girl. These were tears of rage, of frustration, of not getting what she wanted. I'm your daughter, your only daughter. After everything we've done for you, this is how you repay us. Everything they'd done for me. The words hung in the air between us like a challenge. I took a breath, ready to respond. Ready to list every single thing they'd actually done, which was exploit me, use me, turn me into their unpaid servant, while they spent my money on luxuries I could never afford. But before I could speak, Michelle's face crumpled. Her voice rose desperate and pleading now. We have commitments, Dad. Financial commitments. Kyle has, we have debts. Real debts. Her hands were shaking. You're going to ruin us. Don't you understand? We can't survive without that money. We need it. She stopped, seeming to realize what she was saying, what she was admitting. Kyle moved closer to her, his face still purple with rage, but there was something else there now too. Fear. Real fear of losing their source of income. Their personal ATM that had worked so perfectly for 3 years. What? Michelle stammered, her voice breaking completely now. What, you can't do that. You can't. Her eyes were wide, desperate, searching my face for any sign that this was some kind of joke. Some kind of test that she could still pass. We depend on that money. The last word came out almost as a wail. That night alone in my small back room, I finally let the weight of the day settle over me. For 3 years, I'd been a ghost in my own home. Tonight, for the first time, I'd become visible again. I sat on the edge of the narrow bed, the bed I'd been sleeping in since Michelle and Kyle took over the master bedroom, and stared at the silver debit card in my hand. It had arrived 5 days ago Tuesday morning in a plain white envelope from First National Bank of Wisconsin. My name embossed on the front, George Patterson. Such a simple thing. A piece of plastic. But it represented something far more powerful than money. It represented freedom. I thought back to the moment this all began, Wednesday, October 22nd, 9 days ago. The morning I'd found those documents hidden in Michelle's dresser drawer while looking for gardening shears. Sunset Meadows Nursing Home. Monthly cost $4,200. Competency evaluation request. Signed by Dr. Alan Brennan. Petition for guardianship and conservatorship filing date November 5th. My hands had shaken so badly I'd nearly dropped the folder. They were planning to lock me away, to declare me incompetent, to seize my house, my money, everything Helen and I had built over 48 years of marriage. That night I'd barely slept. I'd lain in this same narrow bed staring at the cracked ceiling, my heart hammering against my ribs. Fear had wrapped around my chest like steel bands. But by morning, fear had hardened into something else. Resolve. The next day, Thursday, October 23rd. I told Kyle I needed to go to the bank for paperwork related to Helen's estate. He'd protested, said Michelle could handle it, but I'd insisted. I needed to do this alone. The bus ride had taken 20 minutes. 20 minutes of rehearsing what I'd say, of wondering if I was making a terrible mistake of nearly getting off 3 stops early and going home. But I didn't. At the bank, Jessica Morgan, a kind-eyed woman in her early 30s, had listened to my request without judgment. She'd printed 3 years of statements, 53 pages. I'd sat in that small chair beside her desk and watched the printer spit out page after page of my stolen life. $1,650. K Jewelers, $2,800. Miami Airlines, $2,400. Best Buy 75-inch television, $1,100. Morton's Steakhouse, on and on and on. $85,000 gone, I'd cried. Right there in the bank in front of Jessica Morgan and 2 other customers. I'd put my face in my hands and wept like a child. Jessica had handed me tissues without a word. When I'd finally looked up, she'd said quietly, "Mr. Patterson, I see this more often than you'd think. You're not alone, and you're not too late." She'd helped me open a new account, transfer the remaining $412. Redirect my pension starting November 1st. Order a new debit card 5 business days for delivery. 5 days, she'd said, writing the date on a slip of paper. Tuesday, October 29th. That's when your new card will arrive. That's when you take back control. 5 days had felt like 5 years. I'd gone home that Thursday afternoon and pretended nothing had changed. I'd cooked dinner, done laundry, cleaned the bathroom, served Kyle his coffee exactly the way he liked it. Friday and Saturday I'd kept my head down, stayed quiet, watched Michelle show off her new dress, $350 she'd mentioned casually, like it was nothing. I'd bitten my tongue so hard I'd tasted blood. Sunday, Kyle had noticed something was off. "You okay, old man? You're acting weird." "Just tired," I'd said. "Old age." Monday, I'd been cleaning Michelle's room when I'd found a credit card statement in her nightstand. Balance $25,000. $25,000 in debt, and they'd been spending my pension like it would never run out. That night I'd lain awake again, but this time it wasn't fear keeping me up. It was anger, cold, clean anger that burned away the last of my doubt. Tuesday morning, 5 days after I'd visited the bank, the mail had arrived at 11 o'clock. I'd been standing by the window waiting. When the postal truck pulled up, my heart had nearly stopped. The envelope was thin, white, plain. I'd carried it to my small room, locked the door, and opened it with shaking hands. Inside, one silver card with my name on it, one instruction sheet, one activation sticker. I'd called the number immediately, entered the 16-digit card number, set a new PIN, Helen's birthday, 0428. The automated voice had confirmed, "Your card is now active. Your next Social Security pension deposit of $2,300 will arrive in your account on November 1st in 2 business days. 2 days until Kyle went to the ATM and found nothing. 2 days until the money they'd been spending like water would simply stop." I'd sat on the bed, card in hand, and felt something I hadn't felt in 3 years. Power. Not over them, over myself, over my own life. Now, after today's confrontation, after Michelle's tears and Kyle's threats and my own steady, unshakable words, I held that card again and allowed myself a small smile. I stood, walked to the small dresser, and picked up the photo of Helen I kept there. Taken in 1988, her hair still dark, her smile bright. She was holding the Martin guitar I'd bought her for our 11th anniversary. "I did it, sweetheart," I whispered to the photo. I finally stood up for myself. Tomorrow, Isabella would arrive. Tomorrow, the real fight would begin. But tonight, for the first time in 3 years, I allowed myself this one moment of peace. I'd taken the first step, and there was no going back. It all started 3 years ago on a Saturday morning in April, when the azaleas were just beginning to bloom. I remember the light that day, soft and golden, filtering through the kitchen window while I sat at the table with my coffee and the morning paper. The Brewers had lost again. I was shaking my head at the box score when I heard it. The sound of Helen's guitar. She was out in the backyard, sitting on the old wooden bench we'd built together 20 years earlier, her fingers moving over the strings of her Martin D28. I'd given her that guitar back in 1988 for our 11th anniversary. She'd cried when she opened the case. That morning she was playing something soft, something I didn't recognize, maybe something she'd made up herself. She did that sometimes. I set the paper down and walked to the window just to watch her. She was wearing her favorite cardigan, pale blue, fraying at the cuffs, and her hair was pulled back in a loose bun. The azaleas around her were covered in pink and white blooms, and for a moment, everything felt perfect. Then the music stopped. I looked up, frowning. Helen had set the guitar down on the bench beside her. She was pressing one hand to her chest, her face tight with something I didn't understand at first. Pain. I was out the door before I realized I'd moved. "Helen." She looked up at me, her eyes wide and frightened. She tried to speak, but no sound came out. Her hand clutched at her cardigan, fingers twisting in the fabric. Then she collapsed. I caught her before she hit the ground, barely. She was heavier than I expected, or maybe I was weaker than I thought. I lowered her onto the grass, her head resting in my lap. "Stay with me." My voice cracked. "Stay with me, sweetheart." I fumbled for my phone with one hand, dialing 911 with shaking fingers. The operator's voice was calm, detached, asking me questions I could barely answer. Is she breathing? I didn't know. Is she conscious? No. Can you start CPR? I tried. God, I tried. But my hands wouldn't stop shaking, and Helen's chest wouldn't rise, and the operator kept talking, kept asking me things I couldn't process. The ambulance took 11 minutes to arrive. It felt like 11 hours. They worked on her in the driveway, 2 paramedics moving fast, their hands efficient and practiced. One of them glanced at me and said something I didn't hear. I just stood there frozen, watching them load her into the back of the ambulance. I rode with her to the hospital. I held her hand the whole way, even though I knew she couldn't feel it. At St. Luke's, they took her straight to the ER. I sat in the waiting room for 40 minutes staring at a television I couldn't hear, surrounded by strangers who looked just as lost as I felt. When the doctor finally came out, I knew. I could see it in his face. "Mr. Patterson," he said quietly, sitting down beside me. "Your wife suffered congestive heart failure. We did everything we could, but—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "She's gone. I'm very sorry." I didn't cry. I didn't speak. I just nodded like he'd told me the Brewers lost again. I drove home alone. The guitar was still lying on the grass where Helen had dropped it. The azaleas were still blooming. The coffee cup was still sitting on the kitchen table, half empty and cold. Everything looked the same, but nothing was. The first 6 months were hell in silence. I'd wake up in the morning and reach for her, forgetting for half a second that she wasn't there. I'd make 2 cups of coffee instead of 1. I'd walk into the living room and expect to hear her humming in the kitchen. The house was too quiet. Every room screamed her absence. I stopped going to church. I stopped answering the phone when Leonard called. I stopped doing much of anything except sitting in my chair, staring at the wall, trying to figure out how to keep breathing. Michelle came by a few times that first month. She cried with me. She helped me sort through Helen's clothes, her books, her things. She told me it would get easier. She lied. By the 6th month, I'd stopped eating regular meals. I'd lost 15 pounds. My hands shook when I tried to pour coffee. I couldn't remember the last time I'd showered. The loneliness was unbearable. Every corner of that house held a memory I couldn't escape. Helen's reading glasses on the nightstand, her favorite coffee mug in the cabinet, the indent in the couch cushion where she used to sit. I was drowning in a house full of ghosts. That's when Michelle started visiting more often. She'd show up unannounced, always with Kyle in tow, always with that same worried look on her face. She'd ask how I was doing. She'd bring groceries I didn't ask for. She'd talk about how hard it must be living alone in such a big place. And every time she left, I'd catch her glancing around the house at the furniture, the walls, the yard, with an expression I couldn't quite read. It wasn't concern. It was something else. Something that made my stomach tighten even though I couldn't explain why. The first 6 months were hell in silence, and that's when Michelle started visiting more often, with a worried look and a dangerous suggestion I couldn't see coming. Michelle's visits became more frequent after that first terrible winter. At first I thought it was love. I thought she was worried about her grieving father alone in a house that echoed with Helen's absence. I was wrong. It started 6 months after Helen died, October 2022. Michelle had been stopping by twice a week, bringing groceries, asking how I was sleeping, checking if I'd eaten. Kind gestures. Daughter-to-father care. Then one Saturday afternoon, she arrived with Kyle and 2 suitcases. "Dad," she said, her voice soft, concerned. "We need to talk." I'd been sitting in the living room staring at nothing in particular. The grief was still heavy, then pressing down on my chest like a physical weight. Some days I forgot to eat. Some days I didn't get out of bed until noon. Michelle sat beside me on the couch, Helen's couch, the one we'd picked out together in 1998, and took my hand. "You shouldn't be alone in this big house," she said gently. "What if something happens? What if you fall and no one's here? What if?" She paused, her eyes glistening with what looked like genuine tears. "Dad, I'm worried about you. We're worried about you." Kyle stood in the doorway, nodding. "It's a lot of house for one person, George. Too many stairs. Too much upkeep." "Kyle and I have been talking." Michelle continued, squeezing my hand. "What if we moved in just temporarily? Just until you're feeling stronger. Until you're ready to be on your own again." I looked around the empty house. Helen's reading chair sat vacant by the window. Her coffee mug still sat on the kitchen counter. I couldn't bring myself to put it away. The silence was suffocating. "You'd move in here?" I asked slowly. "Just for a little while," Michelle assured me. "We'd help with cooking, cleaning, all of it. You wouldn't have to worry about anything, and we'd be here if you needed us, day or night." I should have asked questions. I should have wondered why they needed to move, why now, what had happened to their apartment. But grief had made me stupid, lonely, desperate for any kind of companionship in a house that felt like a tomb. "Okay," I heard myself say. "Yes, that would be good." Michelle's face lit up with relief. She hugged me tight. "You won't regret this, Dad. I promise. We're going to take such good care of you." Kyle was already carrying suitcases up the stairs before I could change my mind. The first month wasn't bad. Michelle cooked meals not as good as Helen's, but edible. Kyle mowed the lawn, fixed a leaking faucet, changed light bulbs I couldn't reach. I felt useful helping with dishes, folding laundry, small tasks that made me feel like I was contributing. They'd taken the master bedroom. "You don't need all that space, Dad," Michelle had said already, moving her clothes into Helen's closet. "The guest room is perfect for you. Smaller, easier to heat." I'd moved into the small back room, the one where Helen used to sew, where she'd spent hours making quilts and mending clothes. It had a twin bed, a small dresser, one window that looked out at the fence. I told myself it was temporary. The second month, things began to shift. One evening in December, Kyle knocked on my door. "Hey, George, can I borrow $200 just until Friday? There's this job training course I need to pay for. It could really help me get back on my feet." $200 was a lot, but he was family, and if it helped him find work— "Sure," I said, reaching for my wallet. Friday came and went. Kyle never mentioned the money. When I brought it up a week later, he looked annoyed. "I'll get it to you, George." Jesus. It's not like you need it right away. I never saw that $200 again. In January, Michelle came to me with tears in her eyes. "Dad, I hate to ask this, but we're in a bind. Credit card payment is due, and Kyle's unemployment check was delayed." She wrung her hands. "Could you possibly lend us $300 just to cover it? We'll pay you back as soon as Kyle gets paid." $300. I hesitated, thinking of Kyle's unpaid $200. But Michelle was my daughter, my only child, and she looked so desperate. "Of course," I said. The $300 disappeared, just like the $200 had. By February, Michelle's tone had changed. "Dad, it would be so much easier if your pension just went into my account. That way I could manage all the household expenses directly. Pay the bills, buy groceries, handle everything. You wouldn't have to worry about a thing." Something in my gut twisted. I don't know, Michelle. That's my money, my pension. "And we're using it for the household," she said, an edge creeping into her voice. "It's not like you're spending it on anything else. This way is just simpler, more organized." She placed papers in front of me. Bank forms, authorization forms. Dense paragraphs of legal language I didn't understand. "Just sign here," she said, pointing. "It'll make everything so much easier." I stared at the papers. At my daughter's face, Helen's eyes, Helen's nose, but an expression I didn't recognize. "It's for your own good, Dad," Michelle said softly. "You don't want the stress of managing money. Not while you're still grieving. Let me handle it." My hand shook as I picked up the pen. I signed without reading the fine print, without asking questions, without understanding that I was handing over control of everything I had, my pension, my independence, my freedom. The trap closed so slowly I didn't notice until I was already caught. By March, My entire Social Security check, $2,300 a month, was being deposited directly into Michelle's account. And just like that, I no longer controlled my own money. The small guest room at the back of my own house stopped feeling like a temporary arrangement. It started feeling like a prison. I didn't realize when I stopped being a father and became hired help. It happened slowly. So slowly I didn't notice until it was already done. It started with small requests. Michelle would ask me to make breakfast, since you're up early anyway. I didn't mind. I was used to getting up at 5 the way I had for 41 years on the road. Making eggs and toast felt like pulling my weight. Then it was laundry. Dad, since you're home all day, could you throw in a load? Then it was ironing Kyle's shirts, cleaning the bathroom, vacuuming the living room, scrubbing the kitchen floor. By April, I had a routine. Up at 5, coffee made by 5:30, breakfast on the table by 6:15, dishes washed by 7, laundry started by 8, bathrooms cleaned by noon, dinner prep by 4. I was a maid in my daughter's home paid with my own pension. The requests became criticisms. Breakfast was too slow. The eggs were overcooked. Kyle's shirts weren't pressed flat enough. The bathroom mirror still had streaks. Michelle would stand in the kitchen, arms crossed, pointing out everything I'd done wrong. Kyle would grunt from the couch without looking up from his phone. I'd apologize and do it again. Nobody asked how my day was. Nobody asked if I was okay. Our conversations revolved around chores and complaints. I'd become a useful ghost in their apartment. One Friday evening in May, they got dressed up. Michelle wore a new dress, dark blue with a low neckline. Kyle actually combed his hair. "Where are you going?" I asked from the kitchen where I was washing dishes. "Dinner," Michelle said, checking her lipstick in the hallway mirror. "That new steakhouse downtown." "Oh." I dried my hands on a towel. "What time should I be ready?" She glanced at Kyle. A look passed between them. "Dad, it's loud there. You know how those places are. You wouldn't enjoy it." My stomach tightened. "I don't mind loud. It's just easier if it's the two of us," Kyle said, not meeting my eyes. "You understand." I understood perfectly. They left at 6. I heard Michelle's laughter echoing down the hallway as the door closed. I ate leftover spaghetti alone at the kitchen table, listening to the hum of the refrigerator. Then I retreated to the small back room, not even the guest room anymore. Just a converted storage space with a twin bed and a lamp, and watched old game shows on a television with a cracked screen. That's where I found the receipt. It was stuffed between the couch cushions in the living room the next morning while I was vacuuming. A crumpled piece of paper from a jewelry store on Wisconsin Avenue. One 14-karat gold chain necklace. $1,650. My hands started shaking. $1,650 for a necklace. While I wore the same 3 shirts I'd brought from home, rotating them through the wash every few days. While I asked permission to take an extra helping at dinner. While I slept in a room barely bigger than a closet. I sat down on the couch, staring at the receipt. That money came from my pension. $2,300 a month, earned over 4 decades of 14-hour days, of sleeping in truck stops, of missing birthdays and holidays, and Helen's piano recitals at church. And they'd spent $1,600 on a necklace. I wanted to confront them. I wanted to walk into their bedroom, my old guest room, the one with the nice furniture and the queen-size bed, and demand an explanation. But I didn't, because I was afraid. Afraid they'd tell me to leave. Afraid I'd have to go back to that empty house with Helen's ghost in every corner. Afraid of being alone again. So I folded the receipt and put it in my pocket. That night at dinner, I watched Michelle. She wasn't wearing the necklace. Maybe it was too expensive to wear around the apartment. Maybe she was saving it for special occasions. I pushed the food around my plate, my appetite gone. "Dad, you okay?" Michelle asked, not looking up from her phone. "I'm fine." "You're quiet." "Just tired." She shrugged and went back to scrolling. A week later, I tried to bring it up. We were sitting in the living room, a commercial playing on the TV. Kyle had gone out where I didn't know. Michelle was beside me, half watching, half texting. "Michelle," I said carefully, "I've been thinking. Maybe I should go back to my house." Her fingers stopped moving. She looked at me, her expression unreadable. "What?" I think it's time. You and Kyle need your space. I've been here long enough." Her eyes went cold. "Don't be ridiculous, Dad. You're safe here." The way she said it, safe, made my skin crawl. Like I was a prisoner, not a guest. "I'd be safe at home too," I said quietly. "No, you wouldn't." Her voice was sharp now. "You can barely take care of yourself. You need us." "I don't—" "Dad." She set her phone down, turning to face me. "Stop. You're staying here. It's what's best." I opened my mouth to argue, but something in her expression stopped me. A hardness I hadn't seen before. A warning. I nodded slowly. "Okay." She picked up her phone again. "Good." I sat there for a long time after she left the room, staring at the television without seeing it. My pension wasn't covering household expenses. It was funding a lifestyle they couldn't afford themselves. And I was paying for it with more than just money. The day I discovered what Michelle had done with Helen's guitar, something inside me broke. It started with a simple question. One afternoon in late June, I was looking through an old photo album and found a picture of Helen in our living room, the Martin D28 cradled in her lap, her eyes closed. I realized I hadn't seen the guitar since I'd moved in. That evening, I asked Michelle about it. The guitar. Helen's Martin. "Where is it?" She was scrolling through her phone. She didn't look up. "I moved it to storage. Your house." Something about her tone made my stomach tighten. "Can I go get it?" She finally looked up. "Dad, you don't need it taking up space." "It's not about space. I want something of hers close by." She set her phone down, jaw tight. "I'll check on it." She never did. 2 weeks later, I asked again. Kyle was in the room this time. "Michelle, did you get the guitar?" She exchanged a glance with Kyle. A long silence. "Dad," she said finally, "I sold it." The words didn't register at first. "What?" "I sold it about 18 months ago. I needed money for bills." My chest tightened. "You sold Helen's guitar?" "Dad, it was just sitting there, gathering dust. She's gone. She doesn't need it anymore." "How much?" My voice came out flat. She hesitated. $1,800. $1,800 for the Martin D28 I'd saved months to buy in 1988 for our 11th anniversary. I'd worked extra shifts, skipped lunches, tucked away every dollar. When Helen opened the case, she'd cried. Then she'd played for hours, her fingers finding the strings like they'd been waiting their whole lives. I'd had her name engraved inside. Helen Patterson. April 1988. It was her voice, her presence, and Michelle had sold it for $1,800. I walked out before I said something I couldn't take back. In the back room, I sat on the bed and let myself remember Helen's face that night. The way she'd whispered, "Thank you," over and over. The song she'd made up just for us. Then I thought of something else. The jewelry box. I went to the closet where I'd put Helen's small wooden box months ago. The one with her earrings, her mother's brooch, and her wedding ring. It wasn't there. I searched everywhere. Under the bed, in drawers, the hallway closet. Nothing. My hands were shaking when I walked back to the living room. Michelle was on the couch watching TV. "Where's the jewelry box?" I asked. She didn't look away from the screen. "What jewelry box?" "Your mother's. It was in my closet." She shrugged. "I don't know. Maybe you moved it." "I didn't move it." My voice was louder now. "Where is it?" Kyle sat up, irritated. "Why does it matter?" "Because it has her wedding ring in it." Michelle's face went still. She glanced at Kyle, then back at me. "Dad." "Where is it?" She let out a breath. "I sold it." The room tilted. "You what?" "The ring. Last year. I needed—" "You sold your mother's wedding ring." My voice cracked. "The ring I gave her." "Dad, it was just sitting there." "It was hers," I shouted. "I worked 6 months to buy that ring. She wore it every day for 25 years. She was wearing it when she died." Kyle stood up, his expression cold. "It's just stuff, George. She's dead. Material things don't matter." I turned to him slowly. "Material things don't matter. You're wearing a $200 watch. Your wife is wearing a $1,600 necklace. But my wife's wedding ring doesn't matter." His jaw tightened. "That's different." "How?" "Because it's ours. It was bought with my money." I was shouting now. "Every dollar you've spent came from my pension. You sold my wife's ring and bought yourself jewelry with money I earned." Michelle stepped between us. "Dad, calm down." "How much?" I demanded. "How much did you get for it?" She hesitated. $2,100. $2,100 for the white gold band with 5 small diamonds I'd saved for 6 months to buy in 2002 for our 25th anniversary. I'd worked overtime, tucked money away in an envelope. When I gave it to her at dinner, she'd whispered, "It's perfect." She'd worn both rings, the simple gold from 1977 and the new one every day until she died. The paramedics had placed them in my hand. I'd held them all the way home. Now they were gone, sold to a pawn shop so Michelle could pay off a credit card. I walked back to the tiny room, closed the door, and sat in the dark. I thought about Helen, about the way she'd looked at me when I gave her that ring, about her hands moving over the guitar strings, about the life we'd built, the memories we'd made. And I thought about my daughter, who had taken those memories and sold them like they were nothing. When the tears finally came, they didn't stop for a long time, but I still didn't have the courage to act. Not yet. Because the worst betrayal was still waiting to be discovered. I found the documents on a Wednesday morning hidden in Michelle's dresser drawer. And everything changed. It was October 22nd. I remember the date because I'd been counting the days since Helen died, 18 months, 1 week, and 3 days. Time had stopped meaning much, but I still counted. I was looking for the garden shears. Michelle had borrowed them weeks earlier to trim some plants at my house, the house I hadn't been back to since I'd moved in with her. The azaleas needed attention, she'd said. She'd take care of it. She never returned the shears. That morning she was at work. Kyle was out, I didn't know where, and I'd stopped asking. I was alone in the apartment, and I needed those shears for a small repair job in the back room. I checked the hall closet, the kitchen drawers, the garage. Nothing. Finally, I knocked on Michelle's bedroom door, a habit even though she wasn't home. No answer. I pushed it open. The room was neat, organized. The bed was made. Kyle's clothes were folded on a chair. I walked to the dresser, opened the top drawer carefully. No shears. I opened the second drawer. That's when I saw the folder. It was manila thick, tucked beneath a stack of sweaters. The tab on top read, Sunset Meadows Nursing Home. My hands stopped moving. I should have closed the drawer, should have walked away, but something in my gut told me to look. I pulled the folder out and opened it. The first page was a glossy brochure. Sunset Meadows, a place to call home. Photos of smiling elderly people in wheelchairs sitting in sunny common rooms, playing cards, eating meals at long tables. The pricing sheet was paper-clipped to the back, starting at $4,200 per month. $4,200. My pension was $2,300. I flipped to the next page. A form half filled out in Michelle's handwriting, competency evaluation request. At the top, a name, Dr. Alan Brennan. I read it slowly, my heart pounding in my ears. Patient George Patterson, 72 years old. Referred by daughter Michelle Patterson for cognitive assessment. Preliminary observations, disoriented memory issues, difficulty with daily tasks. Recommendation, full evaluation for assisted living placement. My vision blurred. I didn't know Dr. Brennan. I'd never heard that name in my life. But someone had evaluated me. Someone had written this report. I flipped to the next page. A copy of the evaluation itself, dated 3 weeks earlier. Patient appears confused during interview, unable to recall recent events, expressed disorientation regarding current living situation, demonstrates need for supervised care. 3 weeks ago. I tried to remember. Had I been to a doctor 3 weeks ago? And then it hit me. 3 weeks ago, Michelle had driven me to a clinic on the east side. She'd said it was a routine checkup, that my insurance required an annual physical. I'd been tired that day, groggy actually. I'd taken cold medicine that morning because I'd been sniffling. The appointment had been short, 10, maybe 15 minutes. A young doctor I'd never met had asked me a few questions: what year it was, who the president was, where I lived. I'd answered, though my head had been foggy from the medicine. He'd nodded, written something down, and sent me on my way. I hadn't thought about it since, but now I understood. They drugged me, or at least waited until I was medicated, disoriented. Then they'd taken me to a doctor who'd barely spent 15 minutes with me and declared me incompetent. My hands were shaking as I turned to the next page. It was a legal document, petition for guardianship and conservatorship. The first line read, Michelle Patterson requests appointment as legal guardian and conservator for George Patterson, who is unable to manage his own affairs due to cognitive decline. I scanned the rest of the page. Words jumped out at me. Incapacitated, unsafe, requires full-time supervision, transfer of assets, control of finances, placement in approved facility. At the bottom, a date, November 5th, 2025, 2 weeks from now. She was planning to file this in 2 weeks. The next page was an email printed out. The header read, From Michelle Patterson to Dr. Alan Brennan. I read it twice, my chest tight. Dr. Brennan, thank you for agreeing to help with my father's evaluation. As we discussed, he's been declining rapidly since my mother passed. He's confused, forgetful, and I'm worried he's not safe living independently anymore. I've found a facility that can provide the care he needs, but I'll need documentation to move forward with guardianship. I appreciate your assistance. Best, Michelle. The response was short. Michelle, happy to help. I'll keep the evaluation brief and document what we discussed. Let me know if you need anything else. A B. I set the folder down on the bed, my legs suddenly weak. They'd planned this. Michelle and a doctor I'd never met had coordinated to declare me incompetent, to take away my rights, to put me in a nursing home that cost more than my pension could cover. And then what? The house, the pension, everything I owned. They'd control it all. I'd disappear into Sunset Meadows, drugged and docile, while Michelle and Kyle lived in my house, spent my money, and forgot I existed. The fear hit me like a freight train. I'd been to nursing homes before. I'd visited Helen's mother in one years ago before she died. I remembered the smell, disinfectant and urine and despair. I remembered the rows of wheelchairs in the hallways, old men and women staring at nothing, waiting to die. I remembered thinking, I'll never end up in a place like that. And now my own daughter was planning to put me there. I sat on the edge of Michelle's bed, the folder open in my lap, and tried to breathe. For 18 months, I'd been lost, drowning in grief, too broken to think, too lonely to fight. I'd let Michelle take control because I didn't know how to live without Helen. I'd signed papers I didn't read, moved into a place that wasn't mine, handed over my pension, because I trusted her. I'd been weak. But this wasn't weakness. This was survival. I wasn't going to let them bury me alive. The fear started to shift. Slowly at first, like a tide changing direction. It became anger, hot and sharp and clarifying. They'd stolen Helen's guitar, her ring, my money, my dignity. And now they wanted my freedom. No. I stood up, my legs steadier now. I put the folder back exactly where I'd found it, closed the drawer, and walked out of the room. In the back room, the tiny space they'd shoved me into, the room that smelled like mildew and defeat, I sat on the edge of the narrow bed and stared at the cracked ceiling. For the first time in 18 months, I felt something other than grief. I felt awake. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark, listening to Michelle and Kyle move around in the apartment, their voices muffled through the walls. I thought about Helen, about the life we'd built, about the house we'd bought, the dreams we'd had, the promises we'd made. And I thought about what I'd become. A ghost, a servant, a man with no voice, no money, no control. But I wasn't dead yet. I still had my name. I still had my pension. Legally, it was mine, even if Michelle controlled the account. I still had the deed to my house somewhere in a drawer back home, and I still had a choice. I could let them win. I could let Michelle file that petition, let some judge who'd never met me declare me incompetent, let them ship me off to Sunset Meadows to rot. Or I could fight. I made the decision sometime around 3 a.m, staring at the ceiling in the dark. Tomorrow I'd go to the bank. Tomorrow I'd take back my life. I walked into First National Bank at 10 o'clock Thursday morning. When I walked out, I was a different man. That morning I'd told Michelle and Kyle I was going out. "You where?" Kyle asked from the couch, not looking up from his phone. "The bank." His head snapped up. "What for? Paperwork," I said carefully. Something about Helen's old account. Inheritance forms. Michelle appeared in the doorway, arms crossed. "I can take care of that for you, Dad." "No." The word came out firmer than I'd intended. "I'll handle it myself." Kyle stood up. "George, you don't need to. I'm going." I picked up my jacket from the chair. "I'll be back this afternoon." Michelle's eyes narrowed. "Dad, I'll be fine." I walked toward the door before either of them could stop me. Behind me, I heard Kyle mutter something to Michelle. I didn't turn around. The bus ride took 20 minutes. I sat near the back, watching Milwaukee roll past the windows, my heart pounding in my chest. My hands were sweating. My stomach was tight. I kept thinking about the folder, the petition, the nursing home. By the time I reached the bank, I felt like I might be sick. First National Bank of Wisconsin was small, tucked into a strip mall on Oklahoma Avenue. I'd been here a dozen times over the years to deposit checks, to sign papers when Michelle added her name to my account, to withdraw cash when I still had access. Now I was here to take it all back. Inside, the air was cool and quiet. A few customers stood at the teller windows. An older man sat in the waiting area reading a newspaper. I walked to the desk and asked to speak with someone about my account. The woman who came out was young, early 30s maybe, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and kind eyes. Her name tag read, Jessica Morgan. Mr. Patterson. She smiled and gestured to a chair. How can I help you today? I sat down, my hands folded in my lap. For a moment I couldn't speak. Mr. Patterson, she asked gently. I cleared my throat. I need to see all the transactions on my account, from the last 3 years. Her smile faded slightly. All of them? Yes. She nodded slowly, typing something into her computer. That's going to be quite a few pages. Are you sure? I'm sure. She printed the statements. The machine hummed and clicked, spitting out page after page. When it finally stopped, she handed me a thick stack of paper. 53 pages, she said quietly. I took them with shaking hands. I started at the beginning. January 2023. The first page showed my pension deposits, $2,300 every month like clockwork. And below each deposit, a long list of withdrawals. Restaurants, gas stations, department stores, online purchases. I turned the page. More of the same. Hundreds of dollars week after week. I kept reading. February, March, April, May. By the time I reached June, my vision was blurring. Jewelry store, $1,650. Steakhouse, $100. Airline tickets, $2,800. Electronics store, $2,400. I flipped faster now, scanning each page. Every month, the same pattern. Deposits in. Withdrawals out. My money spent on things I'd never seen, places I'd never been, luxuries I'd never enjoyed. By the time I reached the end, my hands were trembling. 3 years, 53 pages, $85,000. Gone. I set the stack down on the desk, my throat tight. Jessica was watching me, her expression careful. Mr. Patterson, are you okay? I shook my head. I didn't trust myself to speak. She leaned forward slightly. Can I get you some water? No. My voice came out hoarse. I paused, forcing myself to breathe. I need to change my account. A new one. One that only I have access to. She nodded slowly. I can help you with that. And I need to move the money, whatever's left, right now. She glanced at her screen. There's $412 in the account. $400. Out of $85,000. Move it, I said. All of it, and redirect my pension. Future deposits go to the new account. Not this one. Jessica typed quickly, her fingers steady. I'll open a new checking account in your name only. I'll transfer the balance immediately. And I'll contact Social Security to redirect your pension starting next month. How long will that take? The redirect should be effective by November 1st. The transfer happens instantly. I'll also order you a new debit card. It should arrive in 5 business days. 5 days. I nodded. Do it. She worked in silence for several minutes, filling out forms, typing, clicking through screens. Finally, she looked up. All set. Your new account is active. The balance has been transferred. Your pension will deposit into this account starting next month, and your card will arrive by Tuesday, October 29th. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Mr. Patterson, Jessica said quietly. I've worked here for 6 years. I've seen this before. If you need help, legal help, or someone to talk to, there are resources. Elder financial abuse is... I know what it is, I said softly. Thank you. She handed me a folder with my new account information and a phone number for a local legal aid office. Please call them if you need anything. I stood up, my legs steadier than they'd been in months. Thank you, Jessica, she smiled. Good luck, Mr. Patterson. Outside, the sunlight felt brighter. The air felt clearer. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, holding the folder in my hands. The card would arrive in 5 business days. 5 days until they discovered what I'd done. 5 days until Kyle tried to use the old card and found nothing. 5 days to prepare for war. The next 5 business days were the longest of my life. Every morning I woke up wondering if this was the day. Thursday afternoon. After I got back from the bank, I went straight to the back room and closed the door. My hands were still shaking. The folder Jessica had given me was tucked inside my jacket, the papers folded carefully against my chest. I sat on the edge of the narrow bed and stared at the wall. 5 days. 5 days until the card arrived. 5 days to keep pretending. I could do that. I had to. Days 1 and 2, Thursday afternoon and Friday. I went back to the routine. Cooked breakfast, washed dishes, vacuumed the living room, ironed Kyle's shirts. Michelle and Kyle didn't notice anything different. Why would they? I'd been doing this for months. The obedient father, the useful ghost. Friday night, Michelle asked me to make dinner. Kyle wanted spaghetti. I made spaghetti. They ate without looking at me. Day 3. Saturday, October 25th. Kyle noticed something. I don't know what gave it away, maybe the way I held myself a little straighter or the way I looked him in the eye when he spoke. But he noticed. You seem different lately, he said, leaning against the kitchen counter while I washed the breakfast dishes. Something going on. I kept my hands steady in the soapy water. Just tired. Yeah. He crossed his arms. You sure? I turned to face him, letting my shoulders slump. I'm 72, Kyle. I'm always tired. He stared at me for a long moment, then shrugged and walked away. I let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding. Day 4, Monday, October 28th. The waiting was eating me alive. Every time someone knocked on the door, my heart jumped. Every time I heard footsteps in the hallway, I thought it was the mail carrier. But the card didn't come. That afternoon, Michelle came home with shopping bags, designer labels, expensive clothes. Dad, look at this dress, she said, pulling it out to show me. Isn't it gorgeous? I looked at the tag, $350. My pension, my money, spent on a dress she didn't need. I bit the inside of my cheek until I tasted blood. It's very nice. She smiled and disappeared into her bedroom. I went to the back room and sat in the dark. Later that evening, I was cleaning Michelle's room, another task on my endless list, when I found a piece of paper on her nightstand. A credit card statement. I shouldn't have looked, but I did. Balance due $25,000. $25,000. On top of the $85,000 they'd already spent. My vision blurred. The door opened behind me. I turned the statement still in my hand. Kyle stood in the doorway, his eyes narrowing. What are you doing? Cleaning, I said quietly, setting the paper down. You going through our stuff? No. It was on the nightstand. I saw it by accident. He stepped closer, his jaw tight. You got a problem, George. I looked at him. Really looked at him. This man who hadn't worked in 3 years. who'd lived off my money, eaten my food, slept under a roof I'd paid for. And I smiled. "No problem," I said. "Just cleaning." He stared at me for a long moment, then stepped aside. "Finish up and get out." I nodded and left the room. Day 5, Tuesday, October 29th. The mail came at 11 o'clock. I was sitting in the living room pretending to watch TV when I heard the mailbox clatter outside. My heart stopped. I forced myself to wait, to count to 10, to stand up slowly like an old man with creaky joints. Then I walked to the front door. Michelle was at work. Kyle was in the bedroom, probably still asleep. I opened the mailbox. 3 envelopes, a utility bill, a grocery store flyer, and a plain white envelope addressed to me, George Patterson. My hands trembled as I pulled it out. I walked back inside, closed the door quietly, and went straight to the back room. I sat on the bed, the envelope in my lap, and stared at it for a long moment. Then I tore it open. Inside was a silver card, with my name embossed across the bottom, George Patterson, and a small instruction sheet. I picked up my phone and dialed the activation number with shaking fingers. The automated voice walked me through the steps. Confirm my identity. Create a new PIN. Verify the account. Your card has been activated, the voice said. Your next pension deposit will arrive in 2 business days. 2 days. Thursday, October 31st. I hung up and sat in the silence, the card cool and smooth in my hand. For the first time in 3 years, I had control. I had my money back, my independence, my voice. And in 2 days, when Kyle went to the ATM like he always did on the 1st of the month to check the balance or pull out cash for groceries or gas or whatever the hell he wanted, there would be nothing. The account would be empty. And then they'd know. I stood up and walked to the small mirror hanging above the dresser. I looked at myself, really looked. My hair was grayer than I remembered. My face was thinner. There were lines around my eyes I didn't recognize. But my eyes were clear. I wasn't the broken man who'd moved into this apartment 18 months ago. I wasn't the grieving widower who'd signed away his pension because he was too lonely to fight. I was George Patterson, 72 years old, 41 years on the road, husband to Helen for 48 years, father to Michelle whether she deserved it or not. And I was done. 2 more days. On Thursday, when Kyle went to the ATM like he always did, there would be nothing. And then the confrontation I'd delayed for 3 years would finally explode. Thursday morning dawned gray and cold, typical Milwaukee October weather. But I felt warm inside for the first time in 3 years. I woke up at 5, made coffee, and stood at the kitchen window watching the sun struggle through the clouds. Today was the day. My pension had deposited overnight into my new account. $2,300. Mine. And Kyle didn't know yet. I made breakfast in silence, ate slowly. At 9 o'clock, I put on my jacket and walked to the hardware store 3 blocks away. I needed azalea bulbs for the garden back home. On the way back, I saw Kyle's car pass me going the opposite direction. His face was set, determined. I knew where he was going. The ATM. My heart started pounding. I walked faster. By the time I reached the apartment, my palms were sweating. I climbed the stairs, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. Michelle was standing in the living room, her face twisted with fury. Kyle was pacing, phone in hand. They'd been waiting for me. "Where the hell have you been?" Kyle's voice was sharp. I set the bag of bulbs down. "Hardware store." "What the hell did you do, old man?" I looked at him, then at Michelle. Her eyes were red. She'd been crying. "I changed my banking information," I said calmly. "My pension goes to me now." The silence was deafening. Kyle took a step toward me. You can't do that. I can. I did. We depend on that money. Michelle's voice cracked. You depend on my money, I said. Money I earned. Money you've been spending without asking. I walked to the couch and sat down, not because I was tired, because I wanted them to see I wasn't afraid anymore. Let me ask you something, Michelle. How much have you spent in the last 3 years? She blinked. Yeah, what? $85,000. The room went still. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the folded stack of papers from the bank. 53 pages. Every transaction. I set them on the coffee table. $85,000 in 3 years. That's what you've taken from me. Kyle grabbed the stack, his hands shaking. He flipped through the pages, his face going from red to white. These are private. They're mine, I said. My account. My right to see where it went. I leaned forward and pointed to a line. June 15th, Miami Airlines, $2,800. I didn't go to Miami. Did you? Michelle's mouth opened, but no sound came out. July 8th, Best Buy, $2,400. A TV, September 9th, K Jewelers, $1,650. That necklace you're wearing right now. Michelle's hand flew to her throat. $85,000, I said quietly. All of it bought with money I earned over 41 years. And now it's over. Michelle started crying. Dad, please, we have debts. If you cut us off, then get a job. Both of you. Kyle's face twisted with rage. He stepped closer, fists clenched. You think you can just walk away after we took you in? You took me in, I let the words hang. You moved into my grief, Kyle. You saw a broken old man, and you took advantage. His hand slammed down on the coffee table, rattling the papers. Watch yourself, old man. I didn't flinch. Or what you'll hit me, go ahead. Give me one more reason to call the police. Michelle grabbed his arm. Kyle, don't. He shook her off, but didn't move closer. Here's what's going to happen, I said quietly. My money is mine. My pension goes into my account. If you want to stay in this apartment, you figure out how to pay for it yourselves. If you can't. I paused. Then the doors open. Michelle looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. You're really going to abandon us? I'm not abandoning you. I'm taking back my life. Kyle's voice was low, dangerous. You'll regret this. Maybe, I said, but at least I'll be free. I turned toward the hallway when the doorbell rang. We all froze. I walked to the door and opened it. Standing on the threshold, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. Her face a mirror of Helen's when she was young was my granddaughter. Grandpa. Isabella's voice was soft, uncertain. I stared at her, my throat tight. Isabella. She looked past me into the apartment where Michelle and Kyle stood frozen. Her expression shifted confusion, then understanding, then something harder. I got your voicemail from 3 weeks ago. I'm sorry I didn't call back sooner. She stopped scanning my face. Are you okay? I'm okay, I said. She stepped inside, her eyes moving from me to Michelle to Kyle, taking in the tension, the scattered papers on the coffee table. Oh, what's going on? Nobody answered. Isabella walked over, picked up the top page of bank statements and read it silently. Then she looked up at Michelle. Mom, what is this? Michelle's face crumpled. Bella, it's not what it looks like. It looks like you've been spending Grandpa's money. Isabella's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. Is that what this is? Kyle stepped forward. This is none of your business. He's my grandfather. Isabella's voice cut through the room. That makes it my business. She turned to me, her expression softening. Grandpa, how long has this been going on? 3 years, I said quietly. Her jaw tightened. She looked at Michelle, then at Kyle, then back at me. Pack your things, she said. You're coming home. Isabella stood on the threshold, an arrival that would change everything. I hadn't seen my granddaughter in 2 years. Now she stood in my doorway like an angel sent to save me. Isabella was 26, but she looked so much like Helen at that age it made my chest ache. Same dark hair, same sharp eyes, same way of holding herself, like she was ready to take on the world. She stepped inside, her gaze sweeping over the cramped apartment, the tension still hanging in the air, the bank statements scattered on the coffee table. Grandpa, she said quietly, so we need to talk. Michelle stood up from the couch, her face pale. Bella, this isn't a good time. No, Mom. Isabella's voice was calm but firm. I think this is exactly the right time. She turned to me. Grandpa, I talked to Leonard Foster last week. He said he hasn't seen you in 3 years. He said he's been calling but nobody ever answers. He was worried. My throat tightened. Leonard, my best friend for 40 years. I hadn't spoken to him since Helen died. I didn't know he called, I said quietly. Isabella's jaw tightened. She looked at Michelle. So you didn't tell him? Michelle opened her mouth, then closed it. Every time I called to visit, Isabella continued, her voice steady. You told me Grandpa wasn't feeling well, that he was confused, that it wasn't a good time. For 2 years, Mom. 2 years of excuses. Bella, I was trying to protect who? Isabella's voice rose. Him or yourself? Kyle stepped forward, his face dark. You need to leave, Isabella. This is between us and George. Isabella didn't even look at him. She walked over to the coffee table, picked up the top page of bank statements, and read it silently. Then another. Then another. When she finally looked up, her expression was cold. Quick to $85,000, she said quietly. In 3 years. That's what you've taken from him. Michelle's face crumpled. Bella, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. Isabella pulled out her phone. Elder financial abuse. That's what this is called. It's a felony in Wisconsin. She started taking pictures. The bank statements, the receipts still scattered on the table. The credit card statement I'd found in Michelle's room still sitting on the arm of the couch. Kyle moved toward her. Put the phone down. Isabella turned to face him, her eyes blazing. Touch me and I'll call the police right now. He stopped, his fists clenched at his sides. Isabella turned back to me. Can Grandpa tell me what happened? All of it. So I did. I told her about Helen dying, about the grief that swallowed me whole, about Michelle convincing me to move in with them, to let her manage my money, to sign papers I didn't read. I told her about becoming a servant in their home, about the guitar and the wedding ring sold without my permission, about the nursing home documents I'd found in Michelle's drawer. I told her everything. By the time I finished, Isabella's eyes were bright with tears, but her jaw was set, her shoulders square. You're not staying here, she said firmly. You're coming home with me. Bella, Michelle started. No. Isabella's voice cut through the room like a blade. You don't get to talk right now, Mom. You don't get to make excuses or beg forgiveness or tell me I don't understand. You stole from him. You isolated him. You tried to have him declared incompetent so you could take everything he had. Michelle sank onto the couch, her face in her hands. Kyle stepped forward again, his voice low and dangerous. You think you know everything, don't you? You think you're so much better than us. Isabella turned to him slowly. 2 years ago, you asked me for $200. You said it was for a job training course. I gave it to you because I trusted you. You never paid me back. You never even mentioned it again. Kyle's face went red. That's when I started keeping my distance, Isabella said quietly. That's when I knew something was wrong. And Mom, she looked at Michelle. You never stopped him. You never told him to pay me back. You never said a word. Michelle didn't look up. Isabella turned back to me, her expression softening. Grandpa, I should have come sooner. I should have pushed harder when Mom kept making excuses. I'm sorry. It's not your fault, I said quietly. It's not yours either. She reached out and squeezed my hand. But it ends now. She turned to face Michelle and Kyle, her voice steady and clear. Here's what's going to happen. Grandpa is going to pack his things. He's leaving this apartment today. He's going back to his house, the house he and Grandma bought, the house that belongs to him. Bella, we can't afford, Michelle started. I don't care. Isabella's voice was ice. You should have thought about that before you spent $85,000 of his money. Kyle stepped closer, looming over Isabella. You can't just take him. We'll call who? Isabella didn't back down. A lawyer. Go ahead. I've got pictures of every transaction, every receipt, every piece of evidence showing what you've done. Elder financial abuse carries up to 10 years in prison in Wisconsin. Want to test that? Kyle's mouth snapped shut. Isabella looked at me. Grandpa, do you want to leave? I looked around the apartment, the cramped living room, the back room that smelled like mildew, the faces of my daughter and her husband twisted with anger and fear. Yes, I said. I want to leave. Then pack your things. I stood up and walked to the back room. My hands were shaking, but my legs felt steady. I pulled the suitcase out from under the bed, the same one I'd packed 18 months ago, and started folding my clothes. It took less than 10 minutes. I didn't have much. When I came back to the living room, Isabella was still standing between me and Kyle, her phone in her hand, her expression fierce. Wait, Michelle said, her voice hoarse. Dad, please. We can fix this. We can work something out. I looked at her, my daughter, my little girl. The woman who'd cried in my arms when Helen died. The woman who'd stolen my money, sold my wife's treasures, tried to have me locked away. You can stay here, I said quietly, in this apartment. But if you do, you pay rent, $1,200 a month. Isabella cleared her throat. Grandpa, can I make a suggestion? I nodded. She pulled out her phone and typed quickly. Average rent for a 2-bedroom in this area is about $1,100. But considering they've been living rent-free for 18 months, let's call it $1,050. Fair market value. $1,050, I agreed. And you cover your own expenses, food, utilities, everything. Michelle's eyes went wide. Dad, we can't afford. Then get jobs, I said simply. Both of you. Kyle's face twisted with rage. You're really going to do this? You're really going to side with her over us? I'm not siding with anyone, I said. I'm taking back my life. Isabella stepped forward, her voice calm and clear. You have 3 weeks, until the end of November. Either you pay the $1,050 a month and start contributing, or you find another place to live. Those are your options. Michelle looked up at me, her face streaked with tears. Dad. 3 weeks, I said. I picked up my suitcase and walked to the door. Isabella followed, her hand on my shoulder. Behind us, I heard Michelle collapse back onto the couch, sobbing. I heard Kyle curse under his breath, then slam the bedroom door. But I didn't look back. Outside, the October air was cold and sharp. Isabella's car was parked at the curb, a small Honda Civic, its trunk already open. Grandpa, she said quietly as we loaded my suitcase. I'm not leaving you alone with them. I'm staying until this is sorted. I looked at her, my throat tight. You have work. You have a life in Chicago. I can work remotely for a few weeks, and you're more important. She closed the trunk and turned to face me. You're my grandfather. You're the man who taught me how to ride a bike, who took me fishing every summer, who told me I could be anything I wanted. I'm not walking away from you now. I pulled her into a hug, and for the first time in 3 years, I let myself cry. Not from grief, not from shame, from relief. The days after Isabella arrived felt like living in a war zone with invisible bullets. I moved back into my house, the house Helen and I had bought 35 years ago, the house I should never have left. Isabella stayed with me, sleeping in the guest room, working from the kitchen table during the day, making sure I wasn't alone. But Michelle and Kyle didn't leave the apartment right away. They stayed waiting out the 3-week deadline, hoping I'd change my mind. I didn't. The new rules were simple. I bought groceries for myself. I kept them in a separate section of the refrigerator labeled with my name. I cooked my own meals. I ate alone or with Isabella. Michelle and Kyle ate in silence, or they stayed locked in their bedroom. Nobody spoke unless they had to. It was a cold war, and I was determined not to lose. On the 3rd day, I heard Michelle crying in the bedroom. The sound carried through the thin walls, low and broken, the kind of crying that comes from deep in the chest. Every instinct in me wanted to go to her, to knock on the door, to ask if she was okay. I forced myself to stay in the kitchen, hands gripping the edge of the counter, jaw clenched. Isabella looked up from her laptop. Grandpa, I'm fine, I said quietly. You don't have to be. I met her eyes. If I go in there, she'll use it against me. She'll cry and apologize and make me feel guilty, and I'll give in. I can't do that. Isabella nodded slowly. You're right. But it's okay to feel bad about it. I didn't answer. I just stood there listening to my daughter cry and hated myself a little for not breaking. On the 4th day, Kyle changed tactics. He came out of the bedroom mid-morning and sat down at the kitchen table across from me. His face was tired, his eyes bloodshot. For a moment, he almost looked sincere. George, he said quietly, we're family. We need to talk. I set down my coffee cup. I gave you my terms. Pay rent or leave. We can't afford that. You know we can't. Then find a way. Get jobs. Cut expenses. He leaned forward, his voice low and earnest. What expenses? We're already stretched thin. I pulled a piece of paper out of my pocket, a list I'd made the night before. Streaming services, $200 a month. Dining out. At least $300 a month based on your bank statements. The gym membership Michelle never uses. $60 a month. Kyle's sports betting. I don't even know how much that is, but I've seen the charges. His face went red. That's none of your... It is my business when you're asking me to subsidize it. I folded the paper and put it back in my pocket. You want to stay, prove you can afford it. Otherwise, find another place. Kyle's jaw tightened. He looked at me for a long moment, then shook his head. Michelle's a mess. She's crying all the time. She can barely function. That's not my problem. She's your daughter. I know who she is. I met his eyes, and I know what she did. Loving someone doesn't mean letting them destroy you. He stood up his chair, scraping loudly against the floor. You're a cold bastard, you know that? Maybe, I said, but at least I'm free. He left the room without another word. That night, there was a soft knock on my bedroom door. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, the photo of Helen from our wedding day in my hands. I set it down carefully and opened the door. Michelle stood in the hallway, her face pale, her eyes red and swollen. "Dad," she said quietly. "Can we talk?" I stepped aside and let her in. She sat down in the chair by the window, her hands folded in her lap. For a long moment, she didn't speak. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "We took advantage of you. I know that, and I'm sorry." I sat back down on the bed, studying her face. "Are you sorry because you know it was wrong, or because there are consequences now?" She blinked, surprised. "What?" "I need to know, Michelle. Are you apologizing because you understand what you did was wrong? Or are you apologizing because you're afraid of losing this apartment?" Her mouth opened, then closed. "Does it matter I'm apologizing?" "Yes," I said quietly. "It matters." She stared at me, her expression shifting from confusion to frustration. "I don't understand what you want from me. I want honesty. I want accountability. I want you to look me in the eye and tell me you understand that what you did wasn't just about money. It was about trust. It was about taking advantage of someone who was grieving and vulnerable." Her face crumpled. "I know that, Dad. I do. But we were desperate. We didn't have any other options. There are always other options." I stood up, my voice steady. "You could have asked me for help. You could have been honest about your financial situation. You could have treated me like a person instead of a resource." "We did treat you like a person. You treated me like a servant." The words came out harder than I intended. "You had me cooking, cleaning, doing your laundry. You criticized everything I did. You isolated me from my friends. You sold my wife's things without asking. You tried to have me declared incompetent so you could take everything I had." Michelle's face went white. "The nursing home. Don't." I held up a hand. "Don't try to justify it. Don't tell me it was for my own good. I found the paperwork, Michelle. I know what you were planning." She started crying again, her shoulders shaking. I didn't know what else to do. We were drowning, Dad. The debt, the bills, Kyle's been out of work for 3 years. And whose fault is that? She looked up at me, tears streaming down her face. "What? Kyle's been unemployed for 3 years. Has he been looking for work? Or has he been sitting on the couch playing video games, living off my pension?" She didn't answer. "I've seen this pattern since you were young," I said quietly. "You make a mistake, you get caught, and then you cry and apologize and expect everyone to forgive you without consequences. But that's not how it works anymore, Michelle. Not this time." She stood up, her face twisted with anger. "I don't recognize you anymore. This isn't you." "You're right," I said. "This isn't the man you turned into a servant. This is the man I should have been all along." She stared at me for a long moment, her expression somewhere between fury and heartbreak. Then she turned and walked out, slamming the door behind her. I sat back down on the bed, my hands shaking, and picked up the photo of Helen again. "I'm trying," I whispered to her. "I'm trying to do the right thing." The house was silent. But for the first time in 3 years, the silence didn't feel like loneliness. It felt like strength. Isabella brought Leonard Foster to visit on a Sunday morning. I hadn't seen my best friend in 3 years. I was sitting at the kitchen table drinking coffee when I heard the knock. Isabella answered before I could stand up. Grandpa, she called from the front door. Someone's here to see you. I walked to the door and stopped. Leonard stood on the porch, his hands in his jacket pockets, his gray hair thinner than I remembered his face lined with age. But his eyes, those kind, steady eyes, were exactly the same. Scorchers, he said quietly. I couldn't speak. My throat was too tight. He stepped forward and pulled me into a hug. I held on my hands, gripping his jacket, and for the first time in 3 years, I cried in front of someone who wasn't Isabella. I'm sorry, I managed to say. I'm so sorry. Hush, don't, he said, his voice rough. Don't apologize. Just let me look at you. We sat on the front porch, the November air cold, but clear, the sun struggling through the clouds. Isabella brought us coffee, then disappeared back inside to give us space. I didn't know, I said finally. I didn't know Michelle was keeping people away. Leonard nodded slowly. I figured as much. I tried calling. Must have left 20 voicemails over the years. Nobody ever called back. I never got them. I know that now. He took a sip of his coffee, his hands wrapped around the mug for warmth. 2 years ago, Michelle called me. Said your doctor told her you couldn't have visitors, that you were fragile, that seeing people would confuse you. My chest tightened. That's not true. I know, but I didn't know that then. He looked at me, his expression sad. I believed her, George. She's your daughter. I thought she was taking care of you. She wasn't. I started to suspect something was wrong about 6 months later. I drove by your house a few times, but you were never there. So I went to the apartment, the address she'd given me. I knocked on the door. I set my coffee down. What happened? Michelle answered. She wouldn't let me in. Said you were sleeping, that you needed rest, that my visit would agitate you. She practically shut the door in my face. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of it settle in my chest. I tried one more time after that, Leonard continued. A few months later. Same thing. She told me you didn't remember me anymore, that you'd gotten worse, that it was better if I stayed away. I never forgot you, I said quietly. I know. He reached over and squeezed my shoulder. Isabella called me last week, told me what happened, what they did to you. I came as soon as I could. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. We just sat there, 2 old men on a porch, watching the neighborhood wake up around us. How have you been? I asked finally. Leonard smiled, a little sad. Lonely, if I'm honest. Martha passed 2 years ago. Heart attack. Quick like Helen. My throat tightened. I didn't know. I'm so sorry. I tried to tell you. Left a voicemail. Sent a card to your old address. I thought maybe you were angry with me, that I'd done something wrong. You didn't do anything wrong. I wasn't there. I wasn't anywhere. He nodded. Well, you're here now. That's what matters. Inside the house, I could hear the sound of movement. Footsteps, drawers opening and closing, the scrape of furniture being moved. Leonard glanced at the door. They still here. For now. The deadline's tomorrow. They gonna pay? I shook my head. I haven't received anything yet. Good, Leonard said simply. They don't deserve this place. I looked at him surprised. He shrugged. I'm 75 years old, George. I don't have time to be polite about people who hurt my friends. What they did to you, stealing your money, isolating you, trying to put you in a home that's not family. That's abuse. Hearing him say it out loud made it feel more real, more final. I know, I said quietly. Leonard leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting across the yard. You know what I've been doing since Martha died? What? Woodworking. There's a group at the Bayview Community Center. Bunch of old guys like us building furniture, birdhouses, whatever. Meets every Tuesday and Thursday morning. I smiled a little. That sounds nice. You should come. I looked at him. Really? Really? You used to be good with your hands. Remember that bookshelf you built for Helen? Took you 3 months, and she cried when you finished it. I did remember. Helen had wanted a bookshelf for the living room, something sturdy and simple. I'd built it from scratch, sanding every edge, staining it the exact shade of oak she'd asked for. It was still there in the living room, filled with her books. I haven't built anything in years, I said. Neither had I when I started. But it's not about being good at it. It's about having something to do. Somewhere to go. People to talk to. He looked at me, his expression serious. You've been alone for 3 years, George. You don't have to be anymore. My chest felt tight again, but this time it wasn't grief. It was something else. Something lighter. Hope. I'll think about it, I said. Good. We sat in silence for a while longer, the sound of the neighborhood filling the space between us. A dog barking, a car starting, someone mowing their lawn even though it was November. You'll be okay, George, Leonard said finally. You've got Isabella. You've got me. You've got people who care about you. Real people. Not the ones who used you. I knotted my throat too tight to speak. Inside, the sound of movement grew louder. I heard Michelle's voice, muffled and frustrated. I heard Kyle respond, sharp and angry. Leonard glanced at the door again. What are they doing in there? Packing, I think. Good, he said again. A few minutes later, a moving truck pulled into the driveway. It was small rental with U-Haul printed on the side. Leonard and I watched as Kyle came out of the house carrying a box. Then another, then Michelle. Her face pale, her eyes red, carrying a suitcase. Neither of them looked at us. Leonard leaned over. You want me to stay, in case things get ugly? No, I said quietly. I'll be okay. He nodded, standing up slowly. I'll be back Tuesday morning, 10 o'clock. We'll go to the community center together. Okay. He squeezed my shoulder one more time, then walked down the porch steps to his car. I sat there alone watching Michelle and Kyle load their things into the truck and thought about Leonard's words. You've got people who care about you. Real people. For 3 years, I'd thought I had nobody. That Helen's death had left me completely alone. That Michelle and Kyle were all I had left. But I'd been wrong. They'd isolated me. They'd kept me away from Leonard, from my friends, from anyone who might have noticed what they were doing. But they couldn't erase the people who truly loved me, and now those people were coming back. They left on a Thursday evening like thieves slinking away in the dark. I was in the kitchen making dinner when I heard the footsteps on the stairs. Heavy, deliberate, the sound of suitcases being dragged. I set down the knife I'd been using to chop vegetables and walked to the hallway. Michelle and Kyle stood at the bottom of the stairs, each holding a suitcase. Michelle had a box tucked under her arm. Kyle's face was hard, his jaw set. For a moment, nobody spoke. Michelle wouldn't look at me. She stared at the floor, her knuckles white where she gripped the handle of her suitcase. Kyle met my eyes, cold and defiant. We're leaving. Obviously, we can't afford your rent. I nodded slowly. Where will you go? Michelle's voice was quiet, almost a whisper. That's not your concern anymore. The words stung, but I didn't let it show. Do you need help carrying anything? Kyle let out a short, bitter laugh. We don't need anything from you. Michelle finally looked up, her eyes red and swollen. For a second, I thought she might say something, apologize, explain, ask for one more chance. But she didn't. She turned and walked toward the door, her suitcase rolling behind her. Kyle followed his footsteps, heavy on the hardwood floor. I stood in the hallway and watched them load their things into the old Honda Civic parked at the curb. The same car they'd driven 3 years ago when they moved in. The same car Kyle had claimed was on its last legs. The same car they'd used as an excuse for why they needed money. It still ran. Michelle came back inside one more time, carrying the last box. She stopped at the door, her hand on the frame, and for a moment I thought she might turn around. She didn't. She walked out, closed the door behind her, and that was it. No goodbye, no hug, no final words. Just the sound of the car engine starting, the crunch of tires on gravel, and then silence. I stood in the hallway for a long time, staring at the closed door, trying to sort through the tangle of emotions in my chest. Relief, because the pressure was gone. The constant tension, the walking on eggshells, the fear that one wrong word would set them off. Sadness, because that was my daughter, my little girl, the child I'd raised, the woman I'd loved, the person I thought I knew. And freedom, because this house, this home that Helen and I had built together, was mine again. I walked through the rooms, slowly taking it all in. The living room empty now, except for the couch and the bookshelf Helen had loved. The wall where her guitar used to hang bare and marked with a faint outline where the wood hadn't faded. The guest room where I'd slept for 18 months, still neat and tidy. The bed made the lamp on the nightstand. The master bedroom where Michelle and Kyle had been staying. They'd left it a mess. The bed, unmade clothes scattered on the floor, dresser drawers hanging open. I stood in the doorway and looked at it, this room that Helen and I had shared for 48 years. The room where we'd talked late into the night, where we'd held each other through grief and joy, where she'd taken her last breath in my arms. And Michelle had treated it like a storage unit. I closed the door and walked back downstairs. In the kitchen, I found a piece of paper folded on the table. I picked it up, my hands steady, and unfolded it. The handwriting was Michelle's. I hope you're happy alone. That was it. No signature. No love, Michelle. No goodbye. Just 8 words, bitter and sharp, meant to hurt. I read them twice, then set the paper down. For a long time, I just stared at it. Then I picked up my phone and called Isabella. She answered on the second ring. "Grandpa, they're gone," I said. "Are you okay?" I looked around the kitchen where Helen used to bake bread on Saturday mornings, where we'd hosted Thanksgiving dinners, where I'd sat alone for 18 months, grieving. "I'm okay," I said. "Really okay. Do you want me to come over?" "No, I just wanted to let you know. You don't have to worry." "I'll bring breakfast tomorrow morning," she said firmly. 9 o'clock, don't argue. I smiled. Okay. "I love you, Grandpa." My throat tightened. "I love you too, Bella." After we hung up, I stood in the kitchen for a while longer, the note still sitting on the table. "I hope you're happy alone." I picked it up, crumpled it into a ball, and threw it in the trash. Those words couldn't hurt me anymore. For 3 years, I'd been afraid of being alone, afraid of the silence, the emptiness, the weight of Helen's absence pressing down on me until I couldn't breathe. That fear had made me weak. It had made me let Michelle and Kyle take control. It had made me sign papers I didn't read, hand over money I'd earned, become a servant in my own daughter's home. But I wasn't afraid anymore. Because being alone wasn't the same as being lonely. I had Isabella. I had Leonard. I had the woodworking group at the community center, the neighbors I hadn't talked to in years, the life I'd put on hold while I mourned. And I had this house, this home, this place that Helen and I had built together. It was mine. I walked into the living room and sat down on the couch. The house was quiet, but it wasn't the crushing silence of grief. It was peaceful. Calm. On the mantel above the fireplace, Helen's photo smiled down at me. The one from our wedding day, her face young and bright, her eyes full of hope. "I did it," I said quietly. I took it back. She didn't answer, of course. But I felt her presence anyway, warm and steady the way I always had. I sat there for a long time, just breathing, just existing in the quiet. For the first time in 3 years, I felt free. That night, I slept in the master bedroom. I'd cleaned it earlier, stripping the bed, washing the sheets, putting everything back the way Helen and I used to keep it. I lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and waited for the grief to come. The crushing weight of her absence, the ache in my chest that never really went away. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt peace. Not because the grief was gone. It would never be gone. Helen would always be a part of me, a missing piece I'd carry for the rest of my life. But the grief didn't own me anymore. I closed my eyes and thought about Leonard's words. "You've got people who care about you. Real people." He was right. I wasn't alone. And I never had been. I just hadn't been able to see it. That night I slept more peacefully than I had in years. 6 months later, I sat on the front porch, watching the azaleas bloom again. Helen's flowers. It was a Saturday morning in April. The air was cool and fresh, the sun warm on my face. I held my coffee cup in both hands, letting the steam rise, and watched the pink and white blossoms sway in the breeze. A year ago, I'd been sitting in a cramped apartment making breakfast for people who didn't thank me, washing dishes for people who didn't see me. Now I was home. The first month after they left, I spent cleaning. I went through every room top to bottom, scrubbing away the remnants of Michelle and Kyle's presence. I washed the windows. I vacuumed the carpets. I repainted the master bedroom the pale blue Helen had always loved. I took down the bare walls and filled them with photos. Helen and me on our wedding day. Helen in the garden. Helen holding baby Michelle. Helen laughing at something I'd said, her eyes bright and alive. The house stopped feeling empty. It started feeling like home again. In January, Isabella convinced me to go to the Milwaukee Public Library. I hadn't been there in years, not since Helen and I used to go together on Saturday afternoons. The librarian, a young woman named Sarah, showed me to the senior book club. A group of people my age meeting every Friday morning to talk about whatever book they'd chosen that month. I'd been afraid I wouldn't fit in, that I'd forgotten how to talk to people, how to be part of something. But I was wrong. By February, I knew everyone's names. Frank, who'd been a teacher for 30 years. Dorothy, who'd lost her husband the same year I'd lost Helen. Marcus, who told jokes that made everyone groan but laugh anyway. They welcomed me like I'd always been there. In March, Leonard dragged me to a watercolor painting class at the Bayview Community Center. "I don't know how to paint," I'd protested. "Neither do I," he'd said. "That's the point." The instructor was a woman in her 60s named Diane, patient and encouraging. She handed me a brush and a palette and told me to just try. My first painting was terrible. A blob of blue that was supposed to be the sky, a mess of green that was supposed to be trees. But I didn't care, because for the first time in 3 years, I was creating something. Not cleaning, not serving, not surviving, creating. By April, I had a routine. Every morning, I woke up at 6, made coffee, sat on the front porch, and watched the neighborhood come to life. Tuesdays, I went to the local diner, Stella's, a little place on Kinnickinnick Avenue, and had breakfast with Leonard. Eggs, bacon, toast. We'd talk about nothing and everything. His woodworking projects, my painting, the Brewers' chances this season. Wednesdays, we went to the community center for woodworking. I was building a birdhouse. It wasn't much, but it was mine. Friday's book club. Saturdays, Isabella came to visit. She'd drive down from Chicago, show up at 9 in the morning with groceries and a smile. We'd cook together, her teaching me recipes I'd never tried, me showing her the simple meals Helen used to make. We'd watch old movies, talk about her job, her friends, the life she was building in the city. She'd ask about my week, and I'd tell her. About the book club, the painting class, the birdhouse I was working on, and she'd smile proud and relieved and say, "You're doing great, Grandpa." My finances were stable for the first time in years. The pension, $2,300 a month, was mine again. All mine. I paid the bills without worry. The mortgage had been paid off years ago, so it was just utilities, groceries, small expenses. I bought new clothes. Not much, just a few shirts, a pair of good shoes. I bought fresh flowers every week and put them on the kitchen table the way Helen used to. And I saved. Every month, after paying what I needed, I had about $800 left over. I put it in a savings account, watching the balance grow, feeling the weight of security settle over me. I wasn't rich, but I was comfortable, independent, free. By May, I was part of the neighborhood again. I waved to Mrs. Rodriguez next door when she worked in her garden. I chatted with Tom, the mailman, when he delivered packages. I went to the community center's potluck dinners and brought Helen's old casserole recipe. People knew my name. They asked how I was doing. They invited me to things. I wasn't invisible anymore. One Saturday morning, Isabella and I sat on the porch, drinking coffee and watching the azaleas. "You seem happy, Grandpa," she said quietly. I looked at her, this woman who'd saved me, who'd stood between me and the people trying to take everything I had. "I am," I said. "For the first time in 3 years, I really am." She smiled and squeezed my hand. That afternoon, after Isabella left, I stood in the living room and looked around. The photos on the walls, the bookshelf Helen had loved, the couch where we'd sat together every evening, her head on my shoulder, the television on, but neither of us really watching. This house was mine. This life was mine. My pension. The money that had once disappeared into someone else's pockets was mine now. And for the first time in 3 years, I had a savings account that grew a little bigger every month. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. I walked to the window and looked out at the street, at the trees beginning to leaf out, at the neighbors mowing their lawns and washing their cars. And then I saw it. The old Honda Civic pulling into the driveway. I froze. The engine cut off. The door opened, and Michelle stepped out. She looked different. Thinner, her clothes hung loose on her frame. Her face was pale, her eyes shadowed with exhaustion. She looked like someone who'd been through hell. She stood by the car for a moment, staring at the house, her hands shaking. Then she started walking toward the front door. Michelle stood on my doorstep looking like a ghost of the woman who'd left 6 months ago. Her clothes were cheap, faded t-shirt, worn jeans. No makeup. Dark circles under her eyes. Her hands were shaking. "Hi, Dad," she said quietly. I stood in the doorway, my hand on the frame, and said nothing. "Can I come in just to talk? I'm not asking for anything." I hesitated. 5 minutes. She nodded and stepped inside. We sat in the living room. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "I know you've heard that before, but I need to say it again." I didn't respond. She took a breath. "Kyle and I separated 2 months ago. He had more gambling debts than I knew about. Real debts. To people a lot worse than before. They came to our apartment, threatened us. We had to leave in the middle of the night." "Where are you staying?" "With a friend, on her couch. I'm working 2 jobs now. Office during the day, waitressing at night. Trying to pay off what Kyle left me with." I studied her face. The exhaustion was real. Why are you telling me this? I asked quietly. She looked up, tears in her eyes. Because I didn't come for money. I came to tell you that you were right. About everything. I leaned back, waiting. I took advantage of you. I treated you like you were nothing. I stole from you. I isolated you. I tried to take away your freedom. She wiped her eyes. I took your dignity, Dad. And I'm so sorry. I didn't speak. I just watched her. I didn't understand. Not really. I told myself it was okay because we needed the money. But I was lying to myself. I knew it was wrong. Why do you care now? I asked. She looked at me raw and honest. Because I hit rock bottom. Because Kyle left me with nothing, exactly like what I did to you. Because for the first time I know what it feels like to be used, to be abandoned. Her voice broke. I finally get it, Dad. What I did to you. What it must have felt like. And I'm ashamed. We sat in silence. I appreciate you telling me this, I said finally. And I believe you. Her eyes went wide. You do, I do. Because you're not asking me for anything. You're just being honest. She nodded, tears streaming. But Michelle, I continued. An apology is just the beginning. It doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't fix the trust that was broken. I need to see real change. Actions. Over time. And I need time to heal. I understand, she whispered. She stood up slowly. I should go. I just needed you to know. I walked her to the door. She stopped on the porch and turned back. Dad, I'm proud of you. I blinked. What? For standing up to me. For taking back your life. For not letting me walk all over you. She smiled, sad but genuine. I needed someone to do that. You did the right thing. She started down the steps, then looked back. Can I call you not about money, just to talk? I looked at her, this woman who'd hurt me so deeply now, asking for the smallest piece of connection. You can call, I said. But Michelle, it doesn't mean everything's okay. You have to earn my trust back. I know, she said quickly. I just need to know the door isn't completely closed. It's not closed, but it's not wide open either. She nodded, tears streaming. Thank you, Dad. She walked to the Honda Civic, got in, and drove away. I stood on the porch for a long time, feeling the weight of the conversation settle over me. She'd meant it this time. I could see it in her eyes, hear it in her voice, but understanding didn't mean forgiveness. Not yet. Maybe someday. But not yet. That evening, sitting on the porch as the sun set over Milwaukee, I thought about everything I'd learned at 72. The sky was painted orange and pink, the air cool and calm. I held Helen's photo in my lap, the one from our wedding day, and traced the edge of the frame with my thumb. I didn't know if Michelle would really change. I didn't know if she'd keep her promise, if she'd call, if we'd ever rebuild what had been broken. But I knew one thing for certain. I had changed. And that was enough. I thought about the last 3 years. The grief that had swallowed me whole. The mistakes I'd made. The boundaries I'd failed to set. The dignity I'd lost. And I thought about the lessons I'd learned the hard way. Lesson 1, self-love is not selfish. For 3 years, I'd believed that taking care of myself meant abandoning my daughter. That saying no made me a bad father. That my needs didn't matter as much as hers. I was wrong. You can't pour from an empty cup. You can't help someone else if you're drowning yourself. Taking care of yourself isn't selfish. It's survival. Lesson 2. Boundaries are love. I used to think that love meant giving everything, saying yes to every request, never drawing a line. But boundaries aren't walls, they're bridges. They protect you from being used while still allowing connection. Saying no when you need to isn't mean. It's necessary. Lesson 3. Your worth is not measured by what you can give. I'd spent 41 years working, earning, providing, and somewhere along the way, I'd started to believe that my value came from my paycheck, from what I could offer. But I'm more than a pension, more than a bank account, more than a pair of hands to cook and clean. I'm a person, and I deserve dignity at every age. Lesson 4. Family isn't just blood. Michelle is my daughter. I'll always love her. But love doesn't mean letting someone destroy you. Real family, true family, are the people who love you for who you are, not what you can give them. Leonard, who showed up after 3 years and didn't judge me. Isabella, who fought for me when I couldn't fight for myself. The people at the book club, the woodworking group, the neighbors who waved and asked how I was doing. That's family. Lesson 5. Grief makes you vulnerable but not weak. When Helen died, I lost myself. I let the grief consume me. I stopped fighting. I stopped caring. And people like Michelle saw that vulnerability and took advantage. But grief isn't weakness. It's love with nowhere to go. And healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means learning to live with the loss, learning to honor the memory without being paralyzed by it. Helen would want me to live, not just survive. Live. Lesson 6. Age is wisdom, not weakness. At 72, I thought I was too old to start over, too tired to fight, too broken to rebuild. I was wrong. It's never too late to take back your life. It's never too late to stand up for yourself. It's never too late to choose dignity over comfort. 72 doesn't mean invisible. It doesn't mean useless. It means experienced, strong, capable. Lesson 7. Forgiveness must be earned. I want to forgive Michelle someday. I really do. But forgiveness isn't something you give just because someone asks for it. It's earned, through actions, through change, through time. Reconciliation isn't about returning to the way things were. It's about building something new, something healthier, something honest. And that takes more than an apology. Maybe someday Michelle and I will find that. But it won't be today. And that's okay. I looked down at Helen's photo, her young face smiling up at me, full of hope and love. I did it. I whispered into the evening air. I finally stood on my own. I finally took back my life. I think you'd be proud of me. The wind rustled the azalea leaves, soft and gentle. And in my memory I heard her voice, clear and warm the way it used to sound when she'd tell me everything would be okay. I've always been proud of you, George. I closed my eyes, letting the words settle over me like a blanket. She was right. She'd always been proud of me, even when I wasn't proud of myself, even when I was weak, broken, lost. She'd loved me through it all, and now finally I was learning to love myself the same way. If you're reading this, if you're in a situation like mine where someone you love is taking advantage of you, please know this. It's not your fault. You're not selfish for wanting control over your own money, your own life, your own choices. You deserve dignity. You deserve respect. You deserve to be loved for who you are, not what you can provide. And it's never too late. At 72, I took back my life. You can too. Don't wait. Don't make excuses. Don't let fear or guilt keep you trapped. Stand up. Set boundaries. Ask for help. You're worth it. I walked into my house closed the door behind me and smiled. That simple act felt like victory. For the first time in 3 years, the silence inside wasn't suffocating. It was peaceful, warm mine. I moved through each room with fresh eyes, noticing details I'd forgotten. In the living room, a clumsy watercolor painting I'd made in February's art class hung beside Helen's photo on the mantel. The kitchen counter held a single coffee mug, mine alone, not four lined up for a family that had treated me like a servant. The master bedroom still wore the pale blue walls Helen had chosen in 1995. I'd reclaimed it the day Michelle and Kyle left, moving my clothes back into the closet where they belonged. The small back room, once my prison for 18 months, now stored boxes, old tools, and fishing gear, nothing more. My phone buzzed on the kitchen table. Isabella had texted, "Love you, Grandpa. See you Saturday for breakfast at Stella's, my treat this time." Below that, Leonard asked, "Poker game Friday night at the community center. Bring cash, I'm feeling lucky, and the guys miss you." Real connections filled the screen, names of people who cared about me, not my pension check. I wasn't alone anymore. That night, I slept deeply in my own bed, stretched out across the mattress, without nightmares of angry voices, slammed doors, or locked rooms. Dawn arrived without an alarm clock. When sunlight warmed the bedroom, spilling through the curtains Helen had sewn decades ago, I stepped onto the front porch, made a fresh pot of coffee, and breathed in the cool Milwaukee morning air. The neighborhood was waking up around me. Mrs. Rodriguez was already working in her garden next door, planting spring bulbs. "Good morning, George," she called, waving with her trowel. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" I waved back, called out a greeting. Community had returned to my life slowly but surely. Sipping my coffee, I raised the mug toward the brightening sky. To second chances, I whispered, to the morning. To standing on my own 2 feet. To never being too old to take back your life. The azaleas along the porch railing swayed gently in the breeze, pink and white, the same flowers Helen had loved and planted 40 years ago. And hope bloomed right alongside them. Pain taught me lessons no other teacher could. At 72 years old, I rebuilt my life from scratch, set firm boundaries, and reclaimed my worth, not measured by the money I could give others, but by the dignity I deserved as a human being. Age doesn't diminish value. Forgiveness must be earned through real, lasting change, not empty apologies or convenient tears. If you're facing elder abuse right now, know this: it's not your fault. You deserve respect, safety, and a life on your own terms. Share stories like mine to raise awareness. Contact your bank immediately to review account statements and secure access. Seek free legal counsel specializing in elder financial abuse. Reach out to Adult Protective Services, local community centers, or a trusted friend or neighbor. It's never too late to act. I closed my eyes, felt the warm sun on my face, and let peace wash over me. Not because everything was perfect, but because I had finally done what was right. I reclaimed my dignity and my freedom, a kind of freedom no amount of money can ever buy. At 72, I am free, and that freedom is untouchable. Looking back, I realized my biggest mistake wasn't trusting my daughter. It was ignoring the red flags of family betrayal for too long. I told myself blood meant loyalty, that grandpa stories like mine only happened to other people. I was wrong. My advice: don't be like me. Don't wait 3 years to act when you see family betrayal draining your accounts. Don't confuse manipulation with love. Don't sign documents without reading them. The moment someone isolates you from friends, controls your money, or makes you feel like a prisoner in your own home, that's when you must stand up. Here's what I learned. Setting boundaries isn't cruelty, it's survival. Your worth isn't measured by what you give others. Age doesn't make you weak. It gives you the wisdom to know when enough is enough. Grandpa stories shouldn't end in nursing homes or empty bank accounts. They should end in dignity. I believe God allowed me to hit rock bottom so I could find the strength to rise. Helen used to say, "The Lord never gives us more than we can handle, but sometimes He lets us get close to the edge so we remember to hold on." She was right. Faith, along with Isabella and Leonard, pulled me back from that edge. If you're living through Grandpa's stories of abuse right now, hear me, it's not too late. Reclaim your power. Visit your bank. Call a lawyer. Reach out to someone who truly loves you, not your wallet. Family betrayal cuts deepest, but healing is possible when you choose yourself. I'm 72 and free. That freedom cost me 3 years of pain, but it taught me what matters: dignity, boundaries, and chosen family. Don't wait as long as I did. Thank you for walking this journey with me to the end. Please drop a comment sharing your thoughts. What would you do if you found yourself in George's difficult situation? I'd love to hear your perspective. If this story resonated with you, consider subscribing so you won't miss future videos. A gentle reminder: while inspired by real social issues and elder abuse cases, certain elements have been dramatized for storytelling purposes. If this content isn't to your taste, feel free to explore other videos that suit you better.